Welcome to Murder Files 101. Tonight we enter the silence of Siberia, where winters kill without mercy and secrets remain buried under ice. This isn't folklore, it's one of the darkest unsolved murder cases on record. What you are about to hear is real. The dead were found. The answers never were. It began in 1961. In a village so remote it was spoken of only in hushed directions. The Ivanovs were just another family trying to outlast the cold, but their story would end differently. Before I take you further, tell me, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? 4 people lived in that cabin, a father hardened by frost, a mother who stitched warmth into every coat, a boy of 12, and a girl barely 8. They weren't remarkable, but that was what made the tragedy worse. Ordinary lives, erased by something no one dared name. In February, with temperatures plunging to -40, their home went dark. No smoke rose from the chimney. No footprints in the snow. Neighbors waited days before checking, fear outweighing concern. When at last they did, they found the Ivanov's door open to the wind, and the silence inside was suffocating. The cabin told a story without words, a half-eaten meal frozen mid-bite. Chairs overturned, a lamp shattered. Yet there were no bodies, only absence, as if the family had stood up mid-supper and walked straight into the storm. But outside the snow showed nothing, no tracks, no trail, no direction. Police trudged in days later. They noted a torn sleeve snagged near the doorway, claw-like gouges scraped into wood, and droplets of blood that ended abruptly a few paces from the house. 4 people had vanished, and the storm had stolen every footprint. It was less a crime scene than an erasure. Weeks later, the bodies began to surface. The father was found first, stiff and half-buried near a ravine, fists clenched as if he'd fought something unseen. The mother appeared miles away, curled beneath a pine like a child hiding. The landscape hadn't just taken them, it had scattered them deliberately. The boy was found next. His body lay flat on the ice of a frozen lake, his mouth open in a soundless scream, his limbs twisted into angles no living body could endure. His sister, the youngest, was never found. Only her scarf, red wool tangled high in a tree branch. Autopsies, unsettled, even hardened doctors. The family bore no gunshot wounds, no knife cuts. Instead, their bones told of blunt force trauma, crushed ribs, ruptured organs. Yet, the skin was mostly unbroken. It was as if something had struck them with force enough to kill, without leaving any visible weapon behind. Inside the cabin, locks were untouched. Whoever entered hadn't forced their way. They were expected, or already inside. Investigators whispered of betrayal, of someone the family trusted turning violent. Villagers whispered of worse, that the killer was still among them, sharing the same fires, eating the same bread, hiding in plain sight. Theories came quickly, each more desperate than the last. Bandits, soldiers, secret police silencing them for reasons unknown. None fit cleanly, and still, elders told older stories, of tundra spirits, of the leshy in the woods, punishing those who disturbed its land. The line between fact and folklore blurred in the snow. What puzzled authorities most was the silence. No neighbors heard screams, no dogs barked, no desperate signals for help. It was as if the Ivanovs had been taken in one sweep, soundlessly, into the night. Fear settled over the village. If it could happen once, it could happen again. The case dragged on, but the longer it lingered, the colder it grew. Files sat gathering dust, evidence misplaced or destroyed. To outsiders it was forgotten, to locals it was never past tense. Parents warned children not to stray after dark. Some swore they still heard cries carried on the wind. What makes this case endure isn't just its brutality, it's its refusal to make sense. 4 people scattered, 4 different ends, 1 missing child, no suspect ever named, no motive ever proven. Just snow swallowing footprints, time swallowing records, and fear swallowing everything else. The questions outlived the answers. Tonight, we reopen Case 101. The darkest murder in Siberia that remains unsolved. 4 souls vanished into the blizzard, their cabin rotted, their graves forgotten, but their story refuses silence. The cold still clings to it, waiting for someone to look closer, and now that someone is you. When authorities first arrived at the Ivanov cabin, they expected to find a crime of desperation, perhaps a robbery gone wrong, or an attack by starving wolves. But what they saw instead was a tableau that unsettled even seasoned officers. Snow drifted through the open doorway, coating the floors like dust. The overturned furniture suggested violence, yet there were no signs of forced entry, no smashed locks or broken windows. It was as if the family had fought against someone they knew, or against something that didn't need to break its way inside. The first searches focused on the surrounding forest. Teams of men, bundled in fur and wool, trudged through waist-deep snow. They followed faint trails, broken branches, and the eerie stillness of the taiga. For days they found nothing. No footprints, no sled tracks, no sign of human passage. The snow had erased everything, as if nature itself conspired to conceal the truth. When the father's body was discovered at the ravine, investigators felt relief. Finally, a clue. But relief turned to dread as they examined him. His fists were clenched, nails broken as though he'd clawed at the ground in his final moments. His face bore bruises, yet none fatal. His body told of struggle, but not of cause. The snow preserved him like a warning, a message left unanswered. This was no ordinary crime scene. It was a puzzle with missing pieces, where every answer spawned a darker question, and the worst was still to come. The second body, the mother, was discovered nearly a month later. She lay curled beneath a pine tree, arms wrapped around herself as though in sleep, but her eyes, clouded by frost, stared wide into the branches above. No tracks led to her, and no sign explained how she had travelled so far from home. The forensic report described her as malnourished, though she had food in the cabin only days before. Her ribs were fractured, yet there were no marks of blunt weapons. It was as if something inside her had given way under crushing pressure. To the villagers who watched the recovery, it looked less like murder and more like some punishment inflicted by an invisible hand. Rumors spread quickly. Some claimed the mother had fled into the woods in panic, only to collapse in exhaustion. Others whispered of forces that drove her away, luring her into the cold until her body could endure no more. What unsettled them most was her position, her face lifted toward the treetops, as though her last sight had not been the snow beneath her, but something waiting above. The police, bound by reason, struggled for explanations. Hypothermia could not explain her fractures. Human attackers left no trace. Wild animals had not fed on her. Every possibility collapsed under scrutiny, and yet they had no choice but to continue, knowing 2 members of the family still remained unaccounted for. The forest was not finished revealing its secrets, and the next discovery would disturb even hardened men. When the boy was found, his death made the case infamous. He was discovered on the ice of a frozen lake, his small frame twisted unnaturally, his mouth hung open, frozen mid-scream. His hands were raised, as if shielding himself from something above. But the snow around him was untouched, perfectly smooth, as though he had fallen into place and never moved again. The autopsy made matters worse. His internal injuries were catastrophic. Ribs shattered, lungs collapsed, organs ruptured, yet his skin bore only faint bruises, not the kind one would expect from such violent damage. The coroner's report used a phrase, rarely written in official files, force unknown. Villagers spoke of this detail for years. They said the boy had seen something that filled his eyes with terror and crushed him without touch. Hunters recalled legends of creatures that travelled with storms, unseen but deadly. Others whispered that the boy had been silenced for witnessing something human, not supernatural. Perhaps soldiers, perhaps a crime the state wanted hidden. Whatever the truth, his body was impossible to dismiss. Unlike his parents, whose deaths might be stretched into an earthly explanation, the boy's condition defied reason. How could a child suffer such destruction without a weapon, without a fall, without a mark of violence upon the surface of his body. The case was no longer just a local tragedy. It was something darker, a mystery that mocked both science and superstition, daring anyone to explain it. And still, one child remained missing. The girl was never found. Her absence became the cruelest detail of all, for it offered no closure, only endless speculation. The only sign of her existence was a red woolen scarf, snagged high in the branches of a tree. Some argued she had run and vanished into the storm, her body lost forever beneath shifting snowdrifts. Others insisted the scarf was proof of something else, that she had been lifted, carried, or dragged in ways no child could climb alone. Investigators faced a void. Without her body, they could not confirm her death, nor could they dismiss the chance she had been taken. And so, whispers began. Was she kidnapped, hidden, perhaps even alive somewhere? Or was the truth more sinister, that the forest itself had claimed her? For the villagers, her missing presence became a haunting. Children were warned never to wander too far, lest they too vanish into the snow. Parents spoke of the red scarf as a curse, a reminder that even innocence was not safe from whatever force lingered in the taiga. Officially, she was declared lost to exposure. Unofficially, the case fractured. Some officers believed in human killers, bandits, deserters, or secret police silencing the Ivanovs, for reasons buried in state secrets. Others admitted they had no answer, only confusion. And in the middle of that silence, the girl remained, not buried, not mourned, not explained, just missing. A scar in the case that never closed. By the end of 1961, the Ivanov case had become a wound in the heart of Siberia. The official files offered nothing but contradictions. The father had fought. The mother had fled. The boy had been crushed by invisible force. The girl had simply disappeared. Each outcome told a different story, yet all belonged to the same night. Investigators filed theories, each one weaker than the last. Bandits? No signs of theft. Wild animals? The bodies said otherwise. Military involvement? No records, no witnesses, no evidence. Even whispers of secret police failed to explain the injuries. It was as though the Ivanovs had been destroyed by 4 different fates, scattered across the wilderness, united only by the silence surrounding them. For the villagers, silence became the loudest answer. Neighbors avoided the Ivanovs' cabin, claiming they heard noises there after nightfall, groans, whispers, the sound of chairs scraping against the floor. Some swore they saw figures standing at the window, even after the glass frosted over from within. The state eventually closed the file as unsolved, circumstances unknown. But for those who lived nearby, it never closed. Every snowstorm reminded them. Every missing traveler echoed it. The Ivanovs had not just died, they had become a warning, etched into the land itself. This was no accident, no misunderstanding of nature. It was a mystery deliberately left unanswered. And decades later, the file would resurface, demanding another look, because some cold cases refuse to melt, no matter how many winters pass. When the Ivanov case reached Moscow, officials struggled to categorize it. A standard explanation was demanded. The simplest theory suggested bandits or deserters had stumbled into the cabin, taken the family by force, and scattered them through the wilderness. But this theory collapsed under its own weight. Nothing was stolen. The Ivanovs' meager possessions, rifles, tools, even food, remained untouched. The children's clothing, far more valuable in Siberia's brutal winter than money, was left behind. Whoever committed the crime sought not wealth, but something else, something personal. Another early theory blamed wolves. Packs roamed Siberia freely, and tales of entire families torn apart were not rare. Yet autopsies contradicted this. No bites, no claw marks, no torn flesh, consistent with predation. Wolves left nothing behind, but the Ivanovs' bodies were intact, preserved almost respectfully by the cold. Investigators grew uneasy. Every practical explanation collapsed when tested against the evidence. It wasn't simply that the Ivanovs were killed, it was how. Their injuries resembled no known crime. 4 different fates, none aligning, yet all occurring in the same night. The official file drifted towards silence. The Ivanovs became another line in the archives, marked unsolved, but the village did not forget. Their whispers grew louder, weaving folklore into the gaps that reason could not fill. And in Siberia, folklore often lingers longer than fact. Among locals, the most enduring belief was that the Ivanovs had crossed into cursed land. In Siberian folklore, the forests are not empty, they are ruled by beings older than man. The Leshy, a spirit of the woods, was said to punish those who disrespected its domain. Children were warned never to whistle in the forest, never to mock its silence, never to take more than they needed. Some villagers swore the Ivanovs had broken those rules. The father, they said, had cut timber from sacred groves. The mother had taken water from a spring meant only for offerings. The children had played where they shouldn't have, disturbing something that demanded retribution. The family's scattered remains fit the tale neatly, each punished in a different way, each fated to die apart. Skeptics dismissed these stories as superstition. But in a place where winters lasted 9 months and nights stretched endlessly, folklore was not easily separated from survival. Hunters avoided the Ivanov cabin long after the investigation ended, muttering prayers as they passed. Parents told children to stay indoors when storms rose. To the villagers, the case was no longer a crime. It was a warning that some parts of Siberia were not meant for human hands, and that the forest would always reclaim what was taken from it. Not everyone believed in spirits. Others saw in the Ivanovs' fate something darker, yet entirely human. In the early 1960s, Siberia was home to military experiments, testing grounds for weapons, radiation, and classified projects, buried beneath secrecy. Some whispered that the Ivanovs had witnessed something they were never meant to see. Radiation tests conducted near remote villages had occasionally left locals ill, though the reports rarely left government files. Could the Ivanovs have stumbled into such an experiment? Their injuries, massive internal trauma without surface wounds, echoed the effects of blast waves or concussive force. But if so, why were they scattered? Why were only parts of their bodies marked by such devastation, while others appeared almost untouched? Another theory held that the family had been silenced by state security forces, a quarrel, a mistaken identity, or a cover-up gone wrong. But again, the details resisted logic. Secret police left no traces, no files. Yet this case lingered in open confusion, recorded rather than erased. Why preserve a puzzle, rather than destroy it? The conspiracy theories spread far beyond the village. Decades later, researchers pointed to declassified documents hinting at operations near the region. Others dismissed it as paranoia, insisting the Ivanovs were victims of misfortune. But the gap between official silence and local whispers only widened the mystery. In the absence of truth, suspicion became its own form of evidence. Psychologists who revisited the case decades later proposed another angle: madness. The Siberian winters were relentless, darkness stretching for weeks, isolation pressing against fragile minds. Families snapped under less pressure than the Ivanovs endured. Could the father, driven by some break, have turned against his wife and children? The cabin's overturned furniture, the gouges in the walls, perhaps these were the marks of a struggle within, a fight that began at the dinner table and ended scattered across the wilderness. The father's bruises, his broken hands, may be the result of violence both given and received. Yet, this theory faltered when tested against the timeline. If the father was the killer, who killed him? If the mother fled in terror, how did she suffer fatal fractures without a weapon? If the boy was murdered by his father's hands, why did his injuries resemble those of a crushing force far beyond human strength? And what of the girl? If madness consumed the family, why was her body never found? The madness theory became popular among skeptics because it offered the illusion of reason, but in truth, it explained almost nothing. It was neat, but hollow. And for those who stood in the snow that year, looking at the frozen faces of the dead, nothing about the Ivanovs' fate felt ordinary. And so the theories continued, each one clashing with the next, none capable of holding the whole truth. Wolves, bandits, spirits, soldiers, madness, each explained a part, but none explained the whole. The Ivanovs had died 4 different deaths, bound by one single night. Over time, the case became less an investigation and more a reflection of those who studied it. Believers in folklore saw punishment. Believers in conspiracy saw secrecy. Believers in psychology saw madness. But the bodies themselves remained silent, their fractures frozen beyond interpretation. What unsettled investigators most was not just the absence of answers, but the absence of closure. Murder cases, even the coldest, usually pointed somewhere, toward a suspect, a motive, a possibility. This one pointed nowhere. It hung in the air like mist, impossible to grasp. For the villagers, that was the cruelest detail. The Ivanovs had not just died, they had been erased. Their cabin rotted, their names whispered, but their story left behind only a wound. Theories became coping mechanisms, not solutions. And as the years passed, one truth became undeniable. The Ivanov case was not forgotten because it was gruesome. It was remembered because it was unsolvable. A file that resisted both science and superstition. A story that belonged to no category but its own. For years, the Ivanov case lay buried in archives, gathering dust alongside other forgotten tragedies. But in the late 1970s, a folklorist named Pavel Reznikov stumbled upon fragments while researching Siberian legends. He expected stories of spirits, wolves, and endless winters, but instead, he found references to a real investigation. The files he uncovered were incomplete, their pages water-stained and partially missing. Yet even in fragments, they were disturbing. Autopsy notes described internal injuries without external cause. Field reports spoke of blood trails that ended mid-snow. Witness statements were strangely vague, as though edited under pressure. Reznikov realized he wasn't reading folklore, he was reading fact. His publications never accused anyone directly, but they reignited interest. He wrote of the family who died 4 deaths in one night, framing the case as both history and myth. Newspapers picked it up, embellishing details, blurring fact and superstition further. For villagers, the case returned like a ghost, no longer hidden, but carried once more into the open. Authorities bristled at this renewed attention. They insisted the file remained closed, the cause unknown, the story exaggerated. Yet they never released full documentation. Silence spoke louder than denial, and for Reznikov, silence was the most haunting clue of all. The Ivanovs were no longer just a tragedy. They had become a story Siberia itself couldn't bury, and once revived, the case refused to sleep again. In the 1980s, whispers of the case began spreading beyond Russia. Western researchers, already fascinated by the Dyatlov Pass incident of 1959, drew parallels. Both involved remote Siberian wilderness. Both featured victims with internal injuries and missing persons. Both ended with more questions than answers. The Ivanov case became an echo, a darker twin, overshadowed by Dyatlov's fame. Journalists tried to dig deeper, but information was scarce. Local villagers distrusted outsiders, giving them half-truths or silence. Officials refused access to original files. Even the graves of the Ivanovs were reportedly disturbed, some markers missing, others left unmarked. It was as if time itself was erasing what little remained. Yet survivors from the village carried memories. An elderly hunter recalled hearing cries in the forest on the night of the disappearance, human but strangled by distance. Another remembered soldiers appearing in the region days after the discovery, their presence never explained. None of these accounts were confirmed, but each added fuel to a growing fire. Researchers argued endlessly. Was the Ivanov case a prototype of Dyatlov, a similar tragedy born of wilderness and secrecy, or was it something stranger, something unique that defied even comparison? What became clear was this: though decades had passed, the Ivanov mystery still pulsed beneath Siberia's ice, waiting for anyone willing to dig deep enough to feel its cold. By the 1990s, the Soviet Union had collapsed, and with it, the barriers of secrecy began to crack. Archives opened, But the Ivanov file remained elusive. Some claimed it had been destroyed, others that it had been quietly reclassified under state security. Still, scraps surfaced, enough to disturb anyone who read them. One document described the father's injuries in unusual detail: multiple rib fractures, internal bleeding, yet no punctured skin. The examiner wrote, "Trauma not consistent with fall, weapon, or animal." Another fragment hinted at missing witnesses, villagers interviewed, but their statements omitted from the official record. Why remove testimony unless it revealed something inconvenient? Modern investigators tried piecing the puzzle together, but without full evidence, speculation became their only tool. Some leaned toward environmental explanations: katabatic winds, sudden ground tremors, even ice collapses. Others, however, returned to the human element: soldiers, secret experiments, deliberate silencing. Each theory circled back to the same void. None explained why the family was scattered miles apart, each suffering a different fate. And through it all, the missing girl loomed largest. Her absence was a wound the files could never heal. Without her body, the story would always be incomplete, the case always open. The Ivanov mystery didn't just resist closure, it seemed to reject it entirely. And as new generations inherited the story, it only grew colder, sharper, and harder to ignore. In the early 2000s, true crime researchers and online communities began to take notice. Forums compared the Ivanov case to other Siberian tragedies, spinning maps, theories, and translations of surviving Russian documents. The case spread digitally, moving from dusty archives to glowing screens, where new voices tried to pull meaning from silence. Some posts focused on forensic anomalies, others on folklore. A few users claimed to have relatives from the region, who still refused to speak of the Ivanovs, fearing the story itself carried bad luck. "To say their name is to bring winter early," one anonymous writer posted. It was dismissed as superstition, yet it captured the case's lingering aura of dread. A handful of amateur expeditions even traveled to the site of the cabin. What they found was ruins, a collapsed structure, overgrown with moss and snow. But some insisted they heard things in the silence: faint knocks, the sound of footsteps, voices muffled as though trapped in the wood. None of it could be proven, yet all of it mirrored what villagers had whispered for decades. The Ivanov case had crossed from investigation into legend. It was no longer just about what happened in 1961. It was about the unease it left behind. The idea that something walked the forests, something that could not be named, yet still pressed against memory. Today, more than 60 years later, the Ivanov case remains both obscure and unforgettable. Obscure because no official records have ever solved it. Unforgettable because the fragments that survive refuse to fade. 4 people torn apart, 1 child missing forever, a cabin that became a tomb of silence. For some, it is a cautionary tale about Siberia's merciless wilderness. For others, it is evidence of human cruelty, hidden by secrecy. For others still, it is something more elusive, a story where folklore bleeds into fact, where the forest itself seems complicit in the erasure. Theories continue to multiply, but the truth remains where it has always been, out of reach. The Ivanovs are remembered not because their case was solved, but because it never was. Their story lingers, because silence is more haunting than answers. And in that silence, one image endures: a scarf caught high in the trees, twisting in the wind, as if still waiting for its owner to return. The Ivanov case is not just unsolved, it is unresolved, and that is what makes it Siberia's darkest murder mystery, one that still watches, still whispers, and still resists every attempt to bring it into the light. The Ivanov case may have been born in 1961, but it refuses to stay in the past. In recent decades, amateur investigators, journalists, and even documentary crews have tried to trace the truth. They bring equipment, recorders, and maps, but leave with the same thing the first police left with: silence. One crew in 2010 reported malfunctions at the site. Cameras drained of power within minutes. Microphones captured nothing but distorted static. When reviewed later, the footage showed nothing unusual, only the empty ruins of a cabin swallowed by frost. Yet those who stood there swore they felt watched, as if eyes pressed against them from the tree line. Another expedition, led by university students, claimed to find personal effects: a rusted key, a shard of glass, fragments of fabric buried in the soil. Tests dated them to the mid-20th century, but no confirmation linked them directly to the Ivanovs. Still, the timing, the location, and the unease were too much to ignore. Modern forensics might one day solve it, yet the land seems unwilling to yield. Every test ends in inconclusive results. Every attempt stumbles on missing records. It's as though the mystery defends itself, resisting explanation the way the forest resists fire. For those who know the story, it no longer feels like a case. It feels like a presence, a silence that is not empty, but listening. The most chilling element is the youngest child, the girl who was never found. Her absence shapes the story more than anybody ever could. Without her, the case feels incomplete, unfinished. And that is precisely what makes it unforgettable. Some researchers insist she perished in the storm, her body lost beneath shifting snow that may never thaw. Others wonder if she was taken by bandits, by soldiers, or by something nameless that needed her silence. For the villagers, her image became symbolic. She was innocence stolen, a reminder that not even children were safe from the darkness that moved through their land. Legends grew around her. Hunters claimed to glimpse a figure in red, standing among the pines during snowstorms. Mothers told children that if they wandered too far, the lost girl would lead them away, deeper into the trees. Whether myth or memory, her presence endured. The red scarf remains the final clue, a relic that has outlasted every theory. Tangled high in a tree, it flutters in recollections like a flag of surrender, or perhaps a warning. It is the detail no one can dismiss, because it suggests movement no child could make on her own. Her disappearance is the absence at the heart of the case. It ensures the Ivanov tragedy is never fully explained, and never fully at rest. Psychologists, studying the cultural impact of the case, argue that the Ivanovs became less a family and more a mirror. To skeptics, they represent the dangers of paranoia and superstition. To believers, they prove the reality of forces unseen. To locals, they embody the cruelty of winter itself, how quickly it erases life. But for investigators, the Ivanovs remain a professional wound. The official file lists no cause, no suspect, no closure. Every theory raised collapses under contradiction. It is a case that cannot be solved neatly, because it refuses neatness. In that refusal lies its haunting power. Cold cases linger because they invite obsession. This one does more, it stares back. Every reader, every researcher, every listener must choose which explanation they believe, knowing all are insufficient. Wolves, soldiers, spirits, madness, each holds a fragment, yet none hold the whole. The Ivanovs are the silence in between, and perhaps that is why the story endures, because it denies what humans crave most from tragedy: understanding. In place of clarity, it leaves dread. In place of justice, it leaves absence. For the Ivanovs there was no final chapter. For us there is no final answer. Only the same stillness that greeted investigators in 1961, the stillness of a door, ajar, snow drifting across the floor, and a family gone without trace. Some say the Ivanov case is Siberia's forgotten twin of Dyatlov Pass, but in truth, it is colder still. Dyatlov left tents, diaries, cameras, tracks. The Ivanovs left almost nothing. Their silence is more complete, their erasure more deliberate, and perhaps that is why their case bites deeper. Researchers continue to write about them, sometimes in obscure journals, sometimes in late-night forums. Each generation adds new speculation, but none add closure. Theories pile like snowdrifts, burying the truth further rather than uncovering it. Meanwhile, the land remains untouched, the cabin is gone, the graves unmarked. Only the wind remembers, and even it carries the story in fragments. Yet the villagers who still recall the winter of 1961 speak carefully. They do not tell the tale to amuse, nor to frighten. They tell it because it is part of them, because to live in Siberia is to accept mysteries that cannot be tamed. The Ivanovs are one of those mysteries, and so the case lives on, not in files or evidence, but in the way silence presses too heavily in certain forests, in the way red cloth stands out too sharply against snow. It lingers because it was never meant to be solved, only endured. The Ivanov case does not end, it only stops. A father broken, a mother found miles away, a boy frozen mid-scream, and a girl never recovered. A family dismantled by something that left no tracks, no weapon, no suspect. Their absence is more haunting than their deaths, because absence cannot be explained. Decades of research, folklore, and speculation have produced nothing but contradictions. Theories multiply like snowflakes, yet each melts under the weight of its own flaws. Wolves do not leave untouched flesh. Soldiers do not scatter families into the forest without motive. Spirits do not appear in autopsy reports. And still, none of those answers feel further away than the truth. What survives is a story that resists resolution. The Ivanovs are not just victims, they are symbols of what remains unknowable in a world that demands clarity. Their silence is heavier than evidence, and it presses forward in time. Today, their memory endures not because they were solved, but because they were not. A door left ajar, a table set with a meal never finished, a scarf tangled high in the trees. Details that will never settle into one explanation, but instead remain scattered, like the family themselves, across the endless snow. Some stories end with answers. This one never did. The Ivanov family remains scattered in Siberia's snow, their silence older than any explanation we can invent, and that silence lingers. It waits in forests where no footprints last, in cabins where doors creak open on their own, in winds that sound too much like voices. If you've stayed with me this long, you know some mysteries don't fade. They only follow. Perhaps that's why the Ivanovs are remembered. Not because we solved them, but because they remain unsolved, haunting anyone who dares reopen their file. When you close this video tonight, listen carefully to the quiet around you. If it feels heavier than usual, if it presses against you in ways you can't explain, step lightly. The dark has its own ways of reminding us it still watches. This was Murder Files 101, and another case waits in the shadows. I'll be here when you're ready to open it. Until then, keep your doors locked, your lights steady, and your silence unbroken, because the next story might already be closer than you think.